Okay, good morning and welcome everyone to our seventh generation Interfaith Coalition for Responsible Investment webinar on the shareholder resolution process. Really delighted to have you all with us. As I noted earlier, we'll be recording. All the persons have been placed in muted initially just so that we reduce risk of feedback. But you can unmute yourself to ask questions along the way. We really are hoping that this will be a dialogue, and in that way, your questions, your concerns are heard and have the opportunity to be responded to by the two presenters we have with us today. I'll pass it over to Frank Sherman then to give it a little initial welcome.
Well, good morning. I hope you can hear me. I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. This is a kind of our fourth webinar in a series that we have for educating and giving a chance to our members to learn more about what we do and some of the issues that we advocate for. This subject today, shareholder resolutions, as somewhat of a technical topic, so we have some experts with us. But ICCR members have had a long history of using shareholder resolutions to advocate for some of the issues and influence corporate behavior. It is one of many tools that we have, which will be described later, but it's one that's very important for small shareholders in order to amplify our voice. We'll also be talking about how we not only file resolutions, but build the vote and gather a coalition around it. I think this is timely because this whole process of shareholder resolutions is being threatened, is being attacked by various business interests. Not all businesses, I'll say, but some business interests that feel this process is threatening the status quo. The good news about that trend is that we're making a difference. We're getting higher votes and we're getting the attention of the C-suite and the greater public. So I think that's a good news, but the other aspect of that is we have to be sharper and more comprehensive and use some of our coalition expertise to do a better job in our vote, in our filing and our gathering the vote. I want to thank the speakers, both Tim Smith from Walden Asset and Pat Tomaino from Zevin, both experts in this area, longtime fellow ICCR members. They've agreed to share their time and experience with us. I'll let Chris introduce them. But last thing I'll say is please ask questions. Now everyone is put on mute, but you can unmute yourself to interrupt the speakers and ask a question. This is not a polite lecture. This is a discussion. So if they say something that needs further explanation or they use an acronym, as we tend to do often, that you don't know what it is, speak up. Because if you have that question, probably most of the members have that question. So with that, I'll push it back to you, Chris, and thank you for moderating.
Thank you. And Frank, if you'll pull up the slide screen. All right, and if we'll move on to the next one. Wall Street Journal, of course, is probably the newspaper of record when it comes to business. Sometime back, they had this cartoon illustrated in there where you've got the board with the shareholder, or the executives with the shareholders, and the comment, "This is the part of capitalism I hate." In the world of Scripture, in the New Testament, Paul just talks about a thorn in the flesh. And there is a way where, at minimum, the whole shareholder resolution process can be a thorn in the flesh around corporations. But we really trust that it's also a way to make those corporations better and thereby make the world a better place. And today, as we begin to engage in that process, Frank, maybe the next slide, we want to look at just a handful of areas. Frank, can you advance this one slide, please? We want to talk a little bit about what's in our toolkit as shareholders, why and when to use shareholder resolutions, how resolution language is developed, the responsibilities of filers and co-filers. We want to talk about building the vote. We want to talk about AGM statement strategy and networking, and we want to talk about a media strategy. And so with us today in this conversation, we have two companions. We have Tim Smith, who's the Director of Environmental, Social, and Governance Shareowner Engagement at Walden Asset, and Pat Tomaino, Director of Socially Responsible Investing at Zevin Asset Management. A few other little preamble slides just to give you some background on who they are and where they're from. Walden Asset Management, Tim's organization, has been doing this work since 1974. It's a part of Boston Trust. Tim joined, I should add, Boston Trust and Walden currently have $8 billion, as of February, have $8 billion in assets. These slides will be available to you after the webinar, so if you want to read them in more detail. Tim joined Walden in October of 2000. Prior to that, though, for 24 years, he was the founding executive director of the ICCR. So long time engagement in this. And you may have seen recently in Barron's Magazine that Tim is one of the 20 most influential people in ESG investing. As I saw him duck his head there, maybe a little embarrassed by that kind of acknowledgement. With a background also in with the coveted Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary. Looking forward then at Zevin Asset Management, Pat's organization. It's a sustainable and responsible investment manager founded in '97. Employee owned, majority women owned, based in Boston, not unlike Boston Common. They create responsible investment portfolios for institutional and individual clients, and likewise members of ICCR. And Pat, he leads then the whole area in ESG research and engagement. His dialogues with executives, builds coalitions with NGOs and peer firms, and challenges portfolio companies with shareholder proposals. As you'll see down below as well, graduate of Harvard, and engaged with the Responsible Investing Committee of the UUA. And a little background on some of the highlights of what they've been a part of for the last couple of years. Had 21 shareholder proposals in 2017 that went to a vote. Done work with Pepsi-Cola, Kinder Morgan, Starbucks, CVS, Walmart, Colgate, Palmolive, TJX, Apple, and Priceline, as well as Marriott. Now, Pat also had some legal from his area, looked over these, and so we have to make sure we've got the disclosures in there. Again, the fine print on it basically is available for you afterwards, but maybe I guess we're moving on then to look at what's in a shareholder's toolkit. Basically, we've got, as shareholders, a handful of things that we can do. We can engage in dialogue with companies. We can lead and participate in investor coalitions like SGI, ICCR. We can file shareholder proposals. We can vote our proxies in ways that are consistent with our values. We can pursue public policy initiatives, such as testifying at government hearings. And we can educate and provide assistance to investors, non-governmental organizations, and policymakers. So for instance, the sign-on letters that we're a part of might fit under that final category there. There are, again, the opportunities to engage local government or even perhaps a utility commission on the state level or federal government opportunities. But today we really want to look in more deeply at that part of our toolkit that's looking around Tim, maybe starting with this, among those different kinds of things in our toolkit, at what times is it particularly helpful, or why would we go into and when would we go into the filing of a shareholder proposal with companies?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me as part of the discussion today. I appreciate it a lot. I wanted to just give a little bit of a reminder of the importance of the faith community in this work we're talking about today. It was in 1971 that the Episcopal Church filed the first shareholder resolution on a social justice issue. The issue was South Africa. Many of the members of ICCR focused very much on that. So the shareholder resolution process was really started by the faith community. The process for working on environmental, social issues was started by the faith community. And so we've had a history of over 45 years making a difference in the marketplace. And I think that's something we can be proud of, but also recognize there's so much more to be done. I think that the toolkit's a very helpful list of reminding us how we have multiple tools to use in this process. Let's call it of engagement with companies and with the business community. So we're not just filing resolutions, we're engaging companies. And the goal isn't just, I think, for almost all of us, the goal isn't just to fly a moral flag and make a statement. The goal is to do that, but also to try to change companies' policies and practices, to try to have them change their behavior, change their disclosure, change the policies that they work on. So the resolution is one tool to use in that process. I think Pat and I both are involved, as many ICCR members are, in just writing letters to companies or asking for a conversation on the phone or in person. And sometimes those conversations can be highly effective and can bring about some of the changes we're seeking. Other times companies are going to be more reluctant, or they respect what we're asking for, but they're not ready to make a commitment to change. And then the resolution becomes a more official and formal way of putting a request in front of the management, but also in front of the board, and ultimately all the shareholders for a vote. Companies really see that as upping the game, if you will, in contrast to just having a discussion. And oftentimes, companies who've never responded to letters, I'm sure Pat has the same experience. You write some companies and you don't hear from them. You write them 3 times. When you file a resolution, you tend to get a response. And so the resolution sort of officially ups the ante and provides an opportunity for seeking a meaningful win-win dialogue that leads to a win-win solution, possibly. So maybe that's a warm-up comment from me. Chris will give others a chance to speak on this too.
Sure. And Pat, I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to add in terms of that, about context of when and why we might turn to it.
Pat, you might be muted. You have to push *6.
Hi, now I'm unmuted. Hi, and good afternoon, everybody. It's Pat, Miguel, Tomaino. I'm the Director of Socially Responsible Investing at Zevin Asset Management. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. And my thanks to Frank and to Chris for putting this together. I just want to echo what Tim said. I think there's no need to really go on much longer on this particular slide. A shareholder proposal, although they're not used all the time or as a matter of course in our engagement with companies, would they have the effect of rocketing investors' concerns directly into the boardroom in a way that, if you can phrase the proposal correctly and get that on the ballot of a company's annual meeting, it becomes undeniable. And companies then lose sort of the plausible deniability that they're not hearing this issue from their shareholders, or that the question has never been posed. And that tends to not only jumpstart dialogue, it can set the terms for a negotiation where the company agrees to some improvements in exchange for withdrawing often the shareholder proposal. In many cases, that kind of productive negotiation, though, does not happen until after the proposal has gone to a vote, maybe 1 or 2 times. And we'll talk a little bit more about the dynamics of negotiating around shareholder proposals, I guess, a little later.
And then in filing a resolution, the kinds of things that go into it, the person who can file or institution is an institutional person who's had at least $2,000 worth of shares in a company for at least a year. And how's the mechanics of the actual resolution come together? It's limited to 500 words. There are all kinds of sorts of things that go around that. Maybe we'll start with that. Like, how's the resolution language developed? How do you come up with what are those 500 words? Tim, you want to kick that off?
I'll be glad to start off, and Pat has written his share of these too. I think one of the benefits on this call is to remind people that this process of being involved in engagements and resolutions with companies isn't a high-level burden. And the reason I say that is often the resolution text is developed by ICCR or by investors working together on a given issue, or by CERES, the Coalition for Environmentally Responsible Economies, or by groups that are working on board diversity, and the list goes on. So it's not like somebody who says, I want to be involved in a resolution, then has to know how to write one and put the 500 words together. There's lots of guidelines here to remember that you can't ask a company to do something. You can't ask General Motors to start making candy, for example. That's a management decision. You have to keep your resolutions dealing with meaningful disclosure or policy requests. But oftentimes there are resolutions that we've had in our toolkit, to use that term again, Chris, for many, many a year. So we have these kind of standard resolutions, whether it's the issues climate or diversity, and we might fine tune them every year, but it's not like we have to rethink the idea. So the language is often developed by people who have tremendous expertise, and then co-filers are invited or filers are invited using that model language.
Well, and that language inside of there generally has kind of 2 areas, right? There's the resolution itself and the whereas. And maybe you might say a little difference about, or a little bit about, like, what goes into what. And then even like when some of our adversaries begin to use our resolution clauses, what some of your thought is about how to handle that, or how to think about that.
So the resolution, the resolved clause, is what you're asking for. It is generally much shorter. It asks for a report, or it asks for a policy change, and it's specific and clear. The whereases, or what's often after the resolve clause, the supporting statement, gives the logic for it. And I know when Pat and I write these, and often people at ICCR are putting pen to paper, we try to make sure we make a strong business case.
You're cutting out, Tim.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I heard a little motor in the background, but can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's actually out my window.
That was you. All right. So I was just saying that the resolve clause is clear and specific. The whereases and supporting statements give the business logic and the moral case for a resolution as well. And you do that all in 500 words.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add, Tim, is that, for folks on the call who are going to be involved with filing shareholder proposals, most often in 2 different cases. Either there's a big campaign, and so many companies in a sector or across the capital markets are receiving the same kind of proposal. So Tim has been a real pioneer in filing resolutions asking companies to disclose their lobbying and political activity. So that's a proposal that you could, you know, the whereas clauses and the operative clauses that we're talking about are going to be largely the same, whether we're talking about Yum Brands or General Dynamics. And it's plug and chug from there. And certainly, you know, if you're a lead filer on that, it's your responsibility to make. It's your responsibility to ensure that, you know, you're plugging the great information on the, you know, with the company's proper name and particularities about the company's own situation to customize that proposal that's come to you as a sort of scaffold. And so there is some work and some checking and double checking that goes into that kind of process. If you're a lead filer, you're doing a bit of customization, and you know, you're going to have folks at ICCR and folks like Tim and folks like John Keenan who work on lobbying proposals to help you with that process. If you're a co-filer, you're getting a document that has already been submitted by the lead filer to the company. So the proposal, for all intents and purposes, already exists, and the company's received it. But you still have a couple burdens. I don't want to make things seem overly kind of onerous, because they're not. But it's your job to make sure that you're submitting exactly the text that has been submitted by the lead filer, that there hasn't been a change along the way, that your word processor hasn't changed a word here or there or deleted something, or that you're not missing a page. Because in the case that you submit a text that is in any way different from the lead filer's text, your co-filing simply does not count. You're not included among the co-filers of the text. And in fact, you know, in certain circumstances, this can create some confusion, and the company might be able to argue at the SEC that two proposals on the same topic have been filed. And it's not the end of the world, but it's just a little headache that can be avoided with some attention to making sure you're filing the same exact text as the lead filer.
And while we're on the co-filing point, I like the way Pat reminded us. It's a fairly simple process as long as you have the proper piece of paper with you. It is, I think, an important way for investors to show their concern, to be on the public record that they're concerned. You can talk to your community about the fact you've done this. You can put it out as a part of your media outreach that you've been part of this kind of engagement. And sometimes a resolution is just filed by one sponsor. Other times, a few people come together. But on other ones, for example, we just filed a resolution with Emerson Electric about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. I think we probably got 15 co-filers. And I happen to think that it makes a statement when you have religious investors, SRI, investment firms like our own filing, pension funds, foundations, and maybe even some individuals joining in these. It shows that it's not just somebody with that represents a special interest group. So I welcome it. I think it's effective. It makes a statement. And we can talk a little later, Chris, about what impact these resolutions have on company decision making. But I think the fact that you have multiple co-filers helps show them that this is a widespread concern.
Can I have a
question?
Please.
Okay. How can we early on find out what things are being filed by other groups?
That's the key question, and it differs a little bit issue by issue. So say on the political spending lobbying issue, within ICCR, a couple of us coordinate a working group on this. We coordinate the list, if you will, of companies where there either is a filing or we're inviting somebody to step up as a lead filer, and we give you a copy of the resolution. So we try to make it one-stop shopping. So that's one issue where that occurs. On something like climate change and methane, ICCR would create the list of companies that we're trying to petition, again, with the model resolution. So that your question's a key one. How do you get involved if you don't know what the companies are and who's already a participant? And thank goodness you've got Frank and Chris to help do that for the coalition as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Marge. So I think working with both the CRY staff, Chris and I, as well as many of the program directors at ICCR directly that are focused on big banner issues such as climate, food, water, human rights. They kind of are the spider in the web trying to orchestrate who's doing what. I think the third kind of resource to use for ICCR members, and all of our CRY members are ICCR members, you have access to the ICCR database, the shareholder database, where you can sort and look up what's going on at a particular company or a specific focus area. So, for example, the lobbying and political spending, you can look up everything that's going on there, or you can focus in on Emerson Electric and see what's going on at the company level. So I think there's several resources outside of ICCR. We have several allies. Seventh Generation is a member of Ceres, so we have Ceres to lean on in their investor portal. So that's the power of the coalition that brings this.
And we also previously did a webinar that shows you how to navigate the ICCR database, but also Frank and I can help you if you're still unfamiliar with that. Tim, please go ahead.
And I would just add to that, Marge, that I think that in 80% of the cases, then Frank and Chris and ICCR and Ceres can give you what you need. But maybe there's an issue that's not an ICCR priority. I'm thinking about women on boards of directors, which is, I know, a concern to many of the orders that are part of the coalition. And there's a different coalition works on that. There's a model resolution. There's a list of companies that are being filed with. So with just a little bit of digging, we wouldn't make it hard for Frank or Chris. We could give them that list too. And you could, if that was a priority for you, you'd have access to that co-filing opportunity as well.
Can I ask a more technical question and maybe start with Pat? You mentioned the resolution language, and oftentimes that's developed for us by experts. What about the filing letter? That's also important, is it not, to have certain things that you include in that and certain language that you want to make sure is accurate? Can you talk to that, Pat?
Sure. And, we'll try not to go too deep in the weeds, but unfortunately, there's a necessity to go into the weeds because the deck is stacked against us. It's stacked against investors who want to raise matters of environmental and social importance at companies. And they've stacked the deck through the Securities and Exchange Commission process. So the SEC rules require that even if you want to co-file a proposal, that you have to send a letter that furnishes some very specific pieces of information. And that doesn't mean the letter is long. If you're a co-filer of a proposal, you can do this all in one page. But we'll send around models, and all this stuff is available through ICCR, through Seventh Generation, and Tim and I can help you. But an idea of the kinds of information you need in that letter are a very specific account of the legal name of your entity doing the filing, the name of the lead filer of the proposal, the name of the company, very specifically the name of the company, and being very clear that you're filing the matter or co-filing the matter for the shareholder meeting of the upcoming year. So recently the SEC has required that you be very specific about that meeting. And then critically, you have to show up with some account of your right to file the shareholder proposal. And your right to file is based on having held $2,000 worth of stock in the company continuously over the past year. And that's, can get complicated, but it's simple on its face. And you basically attest to that fact in the cover letter, and then you provide a bit more documentation from your order or from your institution's custodial bank, which shows that that you've had a holding that's maybe been held in trust or in custody for you, and it's amounted to $2,000, and that custodial bank would then certify that that holding has not dropped below $2,000 in value over the prior year.
Yeah,
and if all of that doesn't seem complicated enough, your documents have to be dated all on the same day. So everything has to be in the company's hands before their filing deadline. But your cover letter needs to be dated on the day of your postmark. Your custodial letter needs to be dated on the day of the postmark. So you have to plan ahead and make sure that your custodian can date that for you on the day you need it dated, and so on. So that's an idea of the kinds of information you need. If you look at a template one time and cross-references against like kind of what I've told you and advice from Frank and Chris and Tim, then it becomes a little bit easier the more times you do it. But it is a bit of a complicated process.
It's a pretty standard letter once you do it, right, Pat? On the date question, it's interesting. Say you don't get a letter from your bank in time to file, you don't have to have it in your package that you send. You can send it later, but it has to have the date of the filing letter on it saying this is to confirm that so-and-so has owned these shares for a year as from one date to another.
March,
more than you wanted to know, Chris and Frank.
No, it's helpful. And March, it sounded like you had a follow-up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that last fall, Amarin tried to say that we didn't have $2,000 worth, although I had sent the things from the bank and everything was in order, and we had like $60,000 worth. And I just wondered, do companies sometimes try to say that just to turn you away?
Yeah, every once in a while you get a company who's going to be ornery who will play games with the rules, March, you're right. But your response is, well, here's the proof of ownership. Indeed, we do have 2,000. I suppose there'd be a problem if you owned 5 shares a year ago and now you own $60,000 worth. But
yeah, no, we had a lot for a long time.
There you go.
And so Zevin Asset Management takes care of all this. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, I just sent them the same thing back and said, this is what I sent you before. Please read it this time.
Yeah, and I was going to say that Zevin Asset Management takes care of a lot of this on behalf of our clients. And one thing that we run into is our clients sometimes have problems with their custodial banks. They'll reach out to the custodial bank and say, hey, I need a letter certifying that I own $2,000 worth of stock and I've owned it for a year. And they'll either get a big question mark back from the custodial bank, or the custodial bank will inform them that they don't provide such letters. And so, you need to just basically feel confident in replying to them that that's hogwash, that as a client of the custodial bank, you're entitled to a letter as described in the templates that Frank and Chris will send around to you, and that's all part of the suite of services that they're supposed to be offering you. And if they need a template for how to produce such a letter, then you can go to a fellow ICCR member and take a look at one of the letters that they've received from their custodial bank, and it shouldn't be that hard for your bank to follow suit.
It's like 3-4 sentences, so it's not hard at all, is it, Pat?
No.
Right.
And amid all that, if I were to make a mistake in some of the filing in one way or another, we've talked a little bit about, like, for instance, if you don't have that letter right away, you just have to have it dated and submit it later. If there's some error that somehow I missed, is there an opportunity to kind of correct that somehow?
Yes, on many things there is, Chris. So that, say you sent the letter in and you said proof of ownership will follow, and then you're going to get a standard letter from a company, it's almost the same letter, and they send the rules from the SEC and stuff. But by the way, your filing is, they use this term, deficient, because it hasn't included X. And you don't get too upset. You nod and say, okay, I'm sending the letter. I cured that. That's the term they use. So yes, you could modify your filing letter or add additional information to protect yourself.
And I suppose sometimes that some of those kinds of technical things they're going after precisely because they'd rather not have to face this question at the shareholder meeting and in front of the board. What might be some what might be some other ways that a corporation may try to evade or to use the technical term, exclude a proposal like this?
Pat, you want to go ahead on no action request?
Oh gosh, yeah. So Chris, you're right on with that. Companies, I'll talk about it a little bit later when we talk about the shareholder meeting. They like to really manicure and stage produce their shareholder meetings, and they like to have their priorities voted on and call it a day after an hour. And so you really can assume that a company's trying to will try to drive all of shareholders' priorities for that meeting off of the ballot. It's simply what a conventional corporate secretary believes her job to be is in America, in corporate America. And so they have an opportunity, all of these companies, to basically call the game off before it starts. And after we submit our shareholder proposals, they alert the SEC that they've received the shareholder proposal, and they ask the SEC for permission to basically not include that proposal on their ballot. That's why the process kind of counterintuitively is called a no action process. What they're actually asking they're asking the SEC to take no action against the company if the company excludes the proposal. So, and there are several grounds that the SEC rules allow a company to exclude a proposal on. If the proposal, attempts to micromanage the company, it can be excluded. If the proposal's substance has been considered more than 3 times within the last 5 years or several times within a certain amount of time, the company can exclude it. If the proposal essentially does not implicate a major policy issue facing the company can exclude it. So they'll write a letter to the SEC basically laying out their case for why they should be able to exclude the proposal, at which point the filers, this is the job of the lead filer, have a chance to reply to the SEC and make a case that, contra the company, a significant policy issue is raised, or that the proposal simply provides general guidelines or governance suggestions rather than micromanagement, or that a proposal filed 3 years ago and voted down really has nothing to do with the matter at hand. After the company receives, after the SEC receives that reply, sometimes the company will choose to rebut. But more often, the SEC goes back into its chambers there in Washington and decides, basically issues a very short opinion about of 3 sentences saying that the proposal is allowed to stay on the ballot or the proposal's been excluded from the ballot. And one thing to note about this whole process is that it takes a while. It's fairly labor intensive for the lead filer. But there's a lot of support in great lawyers that help with ICCR members to do this kind of work. And there's a lot of information and arguments and resources that can be gleaned from prior correspondence over proposals filed at other companies. And as we get smarter and smarter, and as shareholder proposals get more and more material, and there's simply more concern around from investors over the way companies manage ESG and social responsibility issues, actually more and more of our shareholder proposals are being upheld in the SEC process. In the past year, in the 2017 into 2018 season, we actually had very good results in terms of our shareholder proposals staying on ballots, fewer of them being challenged, and when they're challenged, fewer of them being excluded from ballots. So when we fight, we win.
Anything you want to add, Tim?
I think Pat alluded to the fact that if you're a co-filer, you may get a big Federal Express packet in the mail of 20, 30, 40, 50 pages. And that feels, oh my goodness, what's happening here? But as a co-filer, they're simply doing what they're obligated to do, giving you notice that they're gone to the SEC. But it's not your responsibility to do anything with it because the lead filer is responsible for responding on behalf of all the sponsors.
Any of our members want to add from something of their experience of being challenged and having to write that response to the SEC?
I was a co-filer, but on Ameren, Barbara went back and responded to them, and we got it through, and we won on the vote.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, the vote was
it does bring up
significant, wasn't it? Yeah.
Sorry, Tim. It does raise a point that in the filing letter that we talked about, one key thing that the co-filer has to include, again, it will be in the templates that we share, is the co-filer should give the lead filer the right to speak for the group and to, if mutual agreement is reached, to withdraw for the co-filer's sake. In other words, in the case of Amaran, I'm sure Marge gave to Sister Barbara Jennings the right to withdraw also on her behalf. So that's an important sentence. And what it does is it allows that scale of co-filers to be used by that lead filer in their negotiations.
Oh yeah, that's a great, when we were talking about the initial filing letter, that's a really important part that we forgot to mention. You can within that filing letter say that so-and-so is the lead filer and they're empowered to withdraw the proposal in negotiation of this matter on our behalf. And that makes things a lot simpler from the outset.
Yeah. Frank, maybe we can advance another slide.
Well, before we get off this question of responsibilities, in addition to the SEC, dealing with the SEC challenges, and then speaking for the co-filers, I think that it's very important as a lead filer to recognize that you have people on the bus. And so although some administrative duties to that include having kind of prep calls with your other filers to understand, okay, what are we after here? What are the conditions for withdrawal that we all agree? If I'm speaking on your behalf, let's make sure that I know what our end game is. And sometimes, yeah, it's a case by case. And maybe Tim, you can speak to this, but sometimes I know with Father Mike, he would withdraw with very little commitment from the company, and sometimes that's early on. It's the first filing. If the company agrees to do some study or they agree also for continued dialogue, sometimes that threshold for withdrawal is fairly low. But other times when the company has stalled for years in some cases, and you've gotten good votes in the past, there's no reason to withdraw quickly. So, but I think one of the responsibilities for that lead filer is to make sure the co-filers are on the same page and to also get some ammunition from those co-filers. Sometimes they have a perspective, whether it's a local constituents or other stakeholders, they'll have a relationship that you don't have, that it's important to bring those factors to the table. And I think where you can, bring the co-filers onto the call. Sometimes the company doesn't want to talk to, Tim mentioned 15 filers in the case of Emerson. I know for when you talk climate change and Exxon, it could be in the 30s. So sometimes you can't bring everybody to the table. But if it's a small group, it's very valuable to have those co-filers on the phone so they can raise their concerns directly.
So the amendment I'd add to that, Frank, is I think that's the best practice you've just described, and it's good to remind folks. But among co-filers, there's some people who see themselves as active partners. So they'd like to be on that call, or they want to be getting information so they can interpret it. But there's another tier of co-filers, and I'm not disparaging their role at all, who simply say, I want to add my name to this list of 20 filers, but I don't have the staff time or energy to be involved in dialogues with the companies and following the debate. So keep me informed about what the net end results are, but I'm not able to be a participatory co-filer. So you have those sort of three levels of sponsors that we pay attention to.
That's an important distinction. That's an important distinction. So Pat, maybe we can have you lead us through a little bit some of these slides that you've prepared.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Once we describe the part of the process and all it takes, the preparation and fighting at the SEC to get on the ballot. Once you're on the ballot, you're in an enviable position as an investor, because you're going to have a platform at the annual meeting to showcase the issue. You're going to have the potential to glean a healthy vote from your fellow investors that will get the immediate attention of the board of directors, and then will demand the attention of senior managers in the company underneath them, because when the board wants answers, everyone has to drop what they're doing and furnish a response. So what do you do from there after you're on the ballot to, like they say in politics, get out the vote, GOTV? And that means a few different things. So over the next slides, I'm going to talk about communicating with co-filers and partners like ICCR. I'm going to talk about reaching out to key audiences. I'm going to talk about the process of negotiation on the shareholder proposal, which will occur alongside of, or perhaps instead of, going to a vote, as you see number 4 there. And then we're going to talk about getting out there and messaging on the progress you've made after the meeting. So we can advance to the next slide. So you have a proposal, and the whole conceit with shareholder proposals is that there's a live vote at the company's annual general meeting of shareholders. And your proposal is certainly stronger if you get more votes for that proposal. Over many, many years of filing shareholder proposals, we have a mixed bag of success on vote totals. And that's down to a few different issues. Basically, investors, obviously, in the corporate America are small c conservative. They tend to give management the benefit of the doubt if they're presented with the issue. But most of the time, investors in corporate America are simply not presented with the issue. They hold their shares indirectly through mutual funds or through big investment firms, Wall Street concerns, who, by and large, do not vote on shareholder proposals. And if they do vote on shareholder proposals, by and large, they vote with management against shareholder proposals. That's changing a little bit more as companies, big Wall Street firms, increasingly sign up to commitments like the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, and they understand more and more that it's in their fiduciary duty to vote their shares at shareholder meetings and to obtain responsible and competent ESG research to let them know which shareholder proposals are worth supporting. But it's still an uphill climb, and we still face, vote totals in favor of our shareholder proposals in the 10s and 20s rather than the 40s and 50s most of the time. However, you will see that over the last couple of years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we have increasingly these points of light where we're getting levels of support in the upper 40s and 50s. And that's because the capital markets are coming around. Big Wall Street firms are voting in a responsible way more often. Our proposals are getting sharper and more centered on the business case argument that Wall Street looks for when they want to vote. And the last thing I'll say is that we're getting better at doing everything on this slide, reaching out to fellow investors and getting out to vote. So one of the big ways that you get out to vote is by summarizing the case for the proposal. I know you've just spent 500 words writing a proposal and it's perfect and you got it to the SEC, but you have to do some more writing. And that's a proxy memo is 2 pages. It really should not be more than 2 pages, although I break this rule all the time. That very, in a focused way, lay out what we're asking the company to do, why this is necessary, considering that the company's not doing it. So you have to demonstrate that the company's not doing what they say you should do. And you, in as quantitative a way as possible, lay out how the status quo puts value, shareholder value, at risk. And you can bullet this out. You can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, the longer that company X languishes without a supply chain code of labor standards, the longer that they're vulnerable to reputational concerns, the less confidence that investors have that they have a view to what's happening in their supply chain, and so on. You try to assign a number value to things. You try to cite press reports about regulatory fines that the companies might be facing. You're making a business case. And then you're pushing that proxy memo out through a few different channels. You're sharing it with, obviously, partners like ICCR. You're engaging with big networks like perhaps the UN Principles for Responsible Investment to send out that proxy memo. And then you're doing what, it sounds like a term of art, but we're going to get more and more familiar with it. You're filing that proxy memo as a particular kind of SEC filing called the Notice of Exempt Solicitation. So that's when you actually stick your proxy memo up on the SEC's EDGAR website. And that's really powerful because every time now that someone searches, say Microsoft, they type MSFT into the EDGAR website, they land on a screen with all of the company's securities filings, and your memo arguing for the shareholder proposal will appear on that page of search returns. That's incredibly powerful. Often after I file a notice of exempt solicitation like that, I receive calls from reporters who regularly check that page. I'll receive calls from big pension funds who want to know what the deal is with the new shareholder proposal, and Wall Street concerns who similarly want a explanation of that document.
If I might, getting it up on EDGAR, some of the conversations in ICCR these days have talked a little bit about how, for instance, many of our members in SGI may not have an account to get that up there, but if it's prepared, who can help get that up on EDGAR?
Yeah, if you're not a lead filer, you're not going to have to worry about this process too much. But if you are a lead filer, I think you can collaborate with folks within ICCR who are registered with the SEC. You can collaborate if among the co-filers you have a investment advisor, a group like Tim or mine. Those are folks that are going to be have a filing number with the SEC, and then after paying a nominal fee, basically can engage a company to put that filing up there for you. If you're not in a part of an institution that's regularly making filings with the SEC, it's a bit tougher, I think, to get that ball rolling. But however, I do see that NGOs like As You Sow or non-investment entities do put up notices of exempt solicitation. So that's something we could game through.
Okay.
I'm going to just add to that, Chris, too, that Pat is describing a best practice of being able to put something on the SEC website. But you could write a proxy memo making your case and send it out to other listservs. So you could reach out to thousands of investors that are part of Series and PRI and ICCR, and even send it out to the press without going through the SEC. You're still making the case and can get quoted on why your resolution deserves that kind of support.
That said, if you're a co-filer and your lead filer, is a registered investment institution and they have an SEC number and all that stuff, and they're not doing this, you might ask them why they're not doing it and suggest it very politely that they
it's becoming
put it on there.
It's becoming more popular as a tool. It is unclear whether it actually garners votes just by putting it up on the SEC website. But
so the other thing you want to do,
yeah, but back to Pat's earlier point, about how some of the issues we're working on have moved from sort of a fringe issue to a mainstream investor issue. So whether we're talking about climate change or board diversity, or if we're talking about anything where a company is facing a tremendous threat to its business and reputation. For example, the leadership work that Sister Nora Nash has done on Wells Fargo. All of these are issues that big investors like Fidelity need to pay attention to because it can affect their investment returns, right? And so often you will see them motivated to pay more attention. And now we're beginning to see Vanguard and BlackRock, at least last year, they voted for a couple of resolutions. And we're going to see this month how they did for this year. But we're only getting 30, 40, 50% votes because we have support from the mainstream. And that means sometimes in our business case memos, we sound less like the prophetic faith community and more like, making a case to other investors that is protecting their investments. And I think that we need to recognize that it doesn't mean we left our morals at the door. It means we're speaking language that would influence and affect those big institutional investors who are going to vote their shares not based on morality, but based on their interests as shareholders.
That's a great point, Tim. I just want to skip, just point out a couple more networks that you can push out your memo to. A lot of us hear about the proxy advisory firms, Glass Lewis and ISS. Those are the big research shops that advise big investors and pension funds on how to vote on our shareholder proposals. So it's your right as a proponent to ask for a meeting with their analysts and send through your proxy memo and say, we're sponsoring item number 8 at Google this year, and we'd love your vote. And more importantly, we'd love to be able to explain the proposal to you in a meeting in the coming month. You want to send your materials to Glass Lewis and ISS at least a month prior to the shareholder proposal date, because those shops finalize their recommendations to their clients well ahead of the meeting. The other network you can sort of try to access, often through PRI, often through ICCR, is to try to get meetings with large investors like Vanguard, like T. Rowe Price, like State Street, to ask them how they're considering voting, ask them what their voting policies are on a proposal like yours, and try to make the case just like you would for Glass Lewis. These are getting more and more productive meetings because more and more of these Wall Street shops have something to say for themselves in terms of ethical proposals and how they vote. I'm getting more and more meetings with these kinds of companies. You're more likely even still to get meetings with major union pension funds like the AFL-CIO or SEIU pension funds. Those are firms that are largely probably going to vote your way anyway, but it helps to know how a big investor is thinking. And, it's worth trying to reach out to the major public pension funds like New York State Common Retirement Systems, like CalPERS, like CalSTRS, the state of Connecticut, the state of Illinois. Oftentimes, those investors can be persuaded to vote for your proposal. And if they do, it is worth asking their representatives if they feel comfortable making that public. Many of the public pension funds will announce their intention to vote for a particular high publicity or sort of prominent proposal. Sometimes they'll do a press release to that effect. Other times you can ask them, hey, State of New York, do you mind if I tell this reporter that you're planning to vote for our proposal? They might say yes, because very frequently that's the kind of messaging that they engage in. So it's worth asking, and it helps your press outreach later on to say that these big funds are lining up to vote for your proposal. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, let me just, before you move on, Pat, I'll just add one thing. If we have a proposal and you're the lead within our coalition, and we want a meeting with one of the proxy service companies like Glass Lewis or ISS, we'll do this in collaboration with other ICCR or series investors. So rather than go to ISS to discuss one proposal at one company, Series or ICCR will orchestrate a meeting to discuss several resolutions concerning science-based targets or pay disparity or whatever the issue may be, and have several lead filers on the call because the arguments are very similar, although it's case by case in their deliberation on their advice to various clients on how to vote on a particular proposal at a particular company. They will make those on a case-by-case basis, but a lot of the arguments are similar. So we'll orchestrate this to bring that critical mass of the coalition. And I'll just take this opportunity maybe to call out one of our members, Sister Ruth Garrett's is on the line. Maybe Ruth, if you can take yourself off mute and just give a 2-minute sharing on your meeting with Vanguard and the results on a science-based target proposal with a distribution company, C.H. Robinson, out of in Minnesota. Ruth, are you still out there?
Yes. Vanguard contacted us, and asked for a meeting to talk about our proposal. And so we set one up, and they were very, I don't know, they spent over an hour with us, I think, or at least an hour, talking about the proposal. And they probably voted with us because we ended up with a 38% vote, which is unlikely if you don't have some. They were the major investor, I believe, in C.H. Robinson, or at least one of the major ones. And so I'm sure it was probably their vote that made the difference.
Yeah, and the point there is, many of these large asset firms will have their separate dialogues with large S&P 500 companies on issues of concern. And when Vanguard or BlackRock calls, even ExxonMobil answers the phone. So that they have, but they also have a certain bandwidth. So when you get to a mid-cap, they don't have the time to have that separate dialogue, but they may be interested in a proposal and will reach out to the lead filer on this. And this was the case where Sister Ruth could argue her resolution with Vanguard. And in fact, they did vote with us. So I think that was a very successful hour we spent with them. And maybe as far as trying to figure out how, we asked them how they would vote. They said they do not disclose that. But there is a way of finding out, Tim, how do we know how these mutual fund management companies, how do we know, how can we find out how they vote on a particular resolution?
So every summer, mutual fund companies are required by law to submit something called an NPX form. And those forms describe every single vote they issued. And Series, for example, has the ability to have a staff person who goes through these, has a way to do it via computer, and they can assess how how Vanguard, for example, this year voted on all the climate resolutions or on lobbying. But that Sister Ruth's experience is actually quite notable because 5 years ago, Vanguard wouldn't have placed that call. And it's a sign of the growing interest of mainstream investors who are under some pressure from their clients to actually vote more creatively. So that's a great story, Ruth. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
That's great. We'll just focus now on, like I said, continuing to get out the vote process. These are things you're going to collaborate on with the lead filers of these shareholder proposals, and you're going to work on together as co-filers often. You're engaging the outside world. So you're using a lot of the same data points and facts and figures you've put into your proxy memo to write a press release. to explain the proposal in simple terms for the press. Simple is the watchword, because there's not a lot of information that reporters can digest.
Oh, Pat?
Hello?
Yeah. Okay, good. You're still there.
I don't know how I was muted. Okay, so you're going to have a lot of help, and the lead filers will have a lot of help from ICCR in crafting a press release that positions your ask of the proposal in terms of the overall kind of media story about the company happening at the time. So I thought I'd take an example of a proposal that Zevin Asset Management and a lot of ICCR co-filers filed at Alphabet. They're the parent company of Google. They're a company that is predominantly white and male up and down the corporation, and really has stagnated in terms of progress on diversity and inclusion. And that was coming to a head over the course of the past year when many diverse engineers within the company reported a hostile work environment, memos going back and forth about questioning the value of diversity at all, et cetera. So this is not a high-performing human capital environment. And Zevin Asset Management and our partners filed a proposal asking the company to tie a portion of executive compensation to reasonable performance metrics on inclusion. And, so that was our ask, and that's a very specific kind of, world that we're used to swimming in as ICCR shareholder advocates. But it isn't necessarily what reporters are ready to talk about, and let alone understand. So we help reporters understand our proposal in the vein of basically what was happening at the company, just the lack of diversity in the tech sector generally. This past spring, when our proposal went to a vote, there was a lot of hullabaloo around Google employees confronting their executives about contracts with the Defense Department and ways in which their AI technology could be used for weaponry. So we helped reporters understand that this was another, that this was another, worker-based concern that Google was going to have to get its arms around if it wants to continue to be a successful company. Simple as that. So we reached out to reporters with that very simple message, and that's what we highlighted in the press release. When you talk to reporters, just my big tip for that is, like I said, to keep it simple, KIS, but also to help them understand where the goalposts are with a shareholder proposal. Very often, reporters will look at what happened at a company last year. Maybe they've never even heard of a shareholder proposal, but they'll know that maybe one was on the ballot last year and it lost. And that's when you have to very, helpfully and politely explain that shareholder proposals typically do not receive giant levels of support. And that a proposal, even if it garners 25, 22, 27% of the votes at an annual meeting, is sending a very strong message to the board about the importance and investor concern on the issue. And that a proposal that gets 41 or 42% of the vote is really a landmark. So you have to kind of adjust their expectations on how well these proposals do in terms of numerics. Otherwise, you're not going to get the right kind of news report written about your proposal. And so following on to that, if a reporter ever asks you, do you expect your proposal to win, you know that that's a trap now based on what I've said, and that you should never respond in the affirmative. You should say, I expect that management will have a clear message about investors' concern on XYZ issue.
That's a good statement. I like that.
This gets into a whole discussion about what winning means, doesn't it? So for a lot of companies and a lot of reporters, winning means that you get 50%. The irony is, even if you get 50%, the company doesn't have to do it. And a lot of companies, if you get, as you said, 30% of the vote, it sends such a strong message to the company, says, the time has come for us to pay more attention to this issue. We're hearing from maybe our employees, our clients, our customers. We need to take some action in this space. So for us, success isn't about getting a vote. It's about raising the message, but also trying to encourage the company to change its actions, so that if a company says to us, I promise within the next year we're going to do a widespread search for more board members, and those will include women and people of color. And we make a commitment to do that publicly. You've had an impact, and then of course the company should be expected in the next 6 months or so to change the complexion of its board and make sure there are women and people of color on the board. But that's just one example. It could be a company being pressed to set science-based goals on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or to adopt a plan to reduce its methane emissions, so that there can be multiple ways in which the request is framed that gets company reactions that you'd say, this is a successful outcome. And I know ICCR tracks this carefully. They I think have just posted something on the website, Frank and Chris, that might be good to share with members. And also US CIF and Series likewise are trying to track where did shareholder initiatives and engagements have an impact and bring about change. And that's an awfully important part of our message, whether it's to a reporter or to our own constituents, I think.
Thanks. Pat, you want to move to the next one or stay on this slide?
Pat, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. I was on mute. The last thing I just want to say on this slide is that it really helps to get out of the bubble. Our proposals are fought in SEC land, and they're fought at the annual meeting, which is an elite environment, and not a lot of people have access to that environment unless we open up the process. So ICCR is very good about creating relationships with NGOs who have priorities before the companies where we have shareholder proposals. An example of that is the great coalition building that has around that develops around proposals at Amazon, where at the annual meeting there's all manners of labor groups and Greenpeace and particular labor unions showing up with a common message that Amazon has to be accountable, and our shareholder proposals can fit into that and therefore get bigger media attention. With the Alphabet proposal that I was talking about just a second ago on diversity and executive compensation, we were able to make connections with workers within Google who were organizing themselves with the help of coworker.org, which is a kind of alternative organizing website for doing employee petitions about concerns on labor issues. And we were able to actually find workers who were organizing themselves, who were raising the alarm already on diversity and inclusion. And through that process, we were able to ask some of those workers to present our shareholder proposal at the annual meeting. And it was only that collaboration between workers on the inside and investors on the outside that got us any press attention at all. I shopped around the angle that investors were, approaching Alphabet with certain concerns about diversity and inclusion, and it kind of didn't advance very far. But when I said that, hey, investors are locking arms with workers on the importance of inclusion at Alphabet, and we're going to present a united front to the shareholder meeting, that's where we got all our press attention from. So we can move to the next slide, and I won't take much time on it. You're going to have, once you're on the ballot, and if you've gotten a couple favorable news articles, et cetera, you're going to have a chance to maybe negotiate again with the company. So just a couple things to remember when you do that. 2 months out, a month and a half out from the annual meeting, Father Mike was a master at this, as we were saying. You might want to send a feeler, a little tickler back out to the company and say, like, are there areas where we can pursue possible changes? Is there something you can do, if not this year, next year? Is there some middle ground that perhaps we're missing? And that might create the opportunity for the company to offer something positive in exchange for withdrawing the proposal. It becomes a lot easier to withdraw a proposal before the proxy statement is printed because, your proposal would appear on the ballot anyway. But even if the proxy statement is printed, you can withdraw your proposal, and simply during the annual meeting, the chairman will read that the proposal was withdrawn by mutual agreement, and that shareholders are not expected to vote on that proposal. So, don't let the fact that you're on the ballot distract meaningful possibilities for progress and negotiation up until then.
If I might add, we had some success as well with 2 utilities where in that period we did get the negotiation, and they worked out with us a mutual statement that went in the proxy where the resolution would have gone, so that all the shareholders, as well as in the SEC, there was basically the statement that they had agreed with that. They'd made a commitment to us.
Absolutely. And you're going to put out your feeler, and in most cases you will not get a good faith response and a good negotiation when you're that late in the process. In that instance, you want to be friendly with the company, and basically, like I like to think about it as like leaving open the whole space after the meeting for the resumption of a productive dialogue. So you want to say things like, we're going to have an opportunity to hear about what investors are concerned of at the meeting, and we hope to have a meeting. We hope to have a meeting with management shortly thereafter to pick up this conversation. To basically not make the AGM into this point of conflict and reckoning, but a stage in your productive dialogue, which will continue after the shareholder meeting. So speaking of the big day, this, as I said before, companies really want shareholder meetings to play out exactly as they plan. They are stage managed events with a very tight agenda and an order of operations for the day. And it's important for investor proponents of shareholder proposals to figure out exactly how you fit into that day. That's what's going to allow you to, in the case that you're there for the meeting, to move the proposal, to do that successfully, and then to get the best possible message about your involvement on the day. So some preparation is necessitated in that whole process. So, you have to be clear among the co-filers of the proposal, about who's moving the proposal. So the lead filer of your shareholder proposal may ask you to do that as a co-filer. You may have, some external third party move the proposal if the shareholder meeting is happening halfway around the world. If you are deputized or, authorized to move the shareholder proposal, you're going to be reaching out to the corporate secretary, or they might reach out to you proactively to identify who you are, to make sure that you're ticketed in advance of the meeting, and also to let you know what you need in terms of credentials to enter that meeting. And if they're not being very forthcoming, or if you feel like a month out, 3 weeks before the meeting, you don't have the information you need, and you don't know what you need to enter the meeting, you need to proactively ask them, what do I need to enter your space for that day? Because, we've had a lot of circumstances in which folks, they don't receive a lot of communication from the company. They show up with their driver's license and they think that's going to cut it. And the company then presents them with a batch of rules and regulations that we're just seeing for the first time. So you need to make the company be very clear with you. Very often what they require is an admission ticket provided by your custodial bank, which is issued by Broadridge. That's fairly simple to acquire if you've already been in touch with your custodial bank to get that holding letter, which allowed you to file in the first place. Unfortunately, with a lot of companies, you need, in addition to the custodial letter, an admission ticket, which is just this kind of like, kangaroo court type certificate the company issues for itself to say you're entitled to enter our meeting. And that's fine, but you just have to know in advance what information they need to issue you that ticket. And you have to have the right kind of ID. You also have to make the company be very clear with you about how many minutes you'll have to speak in favor of the proposal. Ask them, how many minutes will I have to speak for this proposal? And you're going to be, you want them to be very clear with you also about when during the meeting and how very particularly you will be recognized to speak, to rise and make the motion and then speak in support of the proposal. Just last year at a company that will remain unnamed, I thought I was very clear with the corporate secretary about the way in which our representative will be recognized at the meeting. Their corporate secretary certified to me that our representative would be recognized to speak. And, as an English speaker, I understand that to mean that the chairman would call on our representative and that it would be very clear to everyone. And instead, something like, I guess the chairman at one point said, and if anybody has anything, now's the time, or something like that. And our poor representative, who'd not done this many times before, just did not know that that was his cue. And after the meeting, this becomes material because the corporate secretary indicated that, oh, well, perhaps our proposal was not properly presented. And we had to go back and forth and haggle. And eventually I was able to say, like, hey, listen, come on. But you don't want to be in that circumstance. So you want to write a speech that is tailored to the amount of minutes you're going to have to speak. You want to practice that speech to make sure you can deliver it in the amount of time that you are allotted, and that you want to say, you know, there are no magic words, but you want to make it very clear that you, you know, first name, last name, are here to hereby move proposal number X on the ballot. Whatever they need in the record to make sure that the proposal has been properly presented, otherwise the vote doesn't count. So you're coming.
Can I just add that what you're describing is exactly the right kind of rules of the road for somebody who's going to go to a meeting that's substantial. Sister Barbara Jennings, I know, has gone to those kind of meetings for us and others to make following exactly the procedures you've described. And then on other occasions, she's gone to a meeting where she was the only shareholder in the room. It was in a law office around a corporate table, and it was like a conversation. She said what she needed to say. But the irony was it was a non-event. And then we should at least acknowledge that with about 300 companies this year, they had virtual only meetings, meaning it was all online. And it wasn't even something like this, Frank and Chris, where you had a Zoom experience. It was all on phone, and really something worth challenging, I think. But it goes all the way from a meaningful exchange like Pat just described to something that's a little bit more off the cuff, and finally something where you get 2 minutes on the phone and you're done.
Yeah, and you know, just as you're filing out, this is something that Sister Barbara, Tim have experience with. You know, you want to know how well you did in terms of the vote, and very often you can approach the corporate secretary or someone on the corporate secretary's team and ask for what they call a preliminary vote count. The vote count will not be official until the company makes an SEC filing in the days following the proposal, but sometimes they'll be sporting and give you the percentage, and then you can share that with your networks with ICCR and get that out to your communities.
Pat,
Some companies actually announce it during the meeting, saying they'll give you either the percent or the votes, or they'll just say it passed or it failed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pat, if I could just add one thing here. In crafting that speech, it's important. It's not a matter of just reading your proposal. Everybody can read that from the proxy statement. But I think the speech in crafting it, you want to appeal to the people in the room, recognizing that 99.9, sometimes 100% of the votes that will be casted have already been casted before your speech. So you're not influencing the vote necessarily, but you're influencing people. And so in most cases where it is a face-to-face meeting, you will have, in addition to senior management, you'll have the board members there. And so they're listening to you. And so hopefully most of them, but so this is not a matter of, this speech doesn't impact the vote, but it gives you that opportunity to have that human interaction. And so beyond the speech itself, you know, if they don't come to you, go to them, go up, tell them you're a shareholder, you're here to move a resolution, you'd like to meet with them, and oftentimes a more enlightened CEO will seek you out and meet you and say hello. But this is your opportunity. Don't be bashful. You're an owner of the company, and you're coming from a faith community. This is your chance to speak to them. And so take that opportunity. We don't have a lot of time, but I'll just relay again. I'll embarrass Sister Ruth. She got a call, same company, C.H. Robinson. She got a call an hour after the vote, and this was a virtual meeting. So the impact she had is far more limited without the face-to-face. But she spoke for 4 minutes of the 11-minute meeting, and she got a call from the corporate secretary an hour later to thank her, but also say that he personally got a call from his mother, who was on the line and was a shareholder, and told him that Sister Ruth in her speech had convinced her to vote for the resolution.
Oh, that's great.
So
yeah,
this is the personal touch.
That's wonderful.
Well,
Isn't that a great story?
I
So
knew her parents. I mean, I knew her parents from a parish where I was a pastoral minister in Fargo, North Dakota. So
oh wow.
I knew the parents, and he said, my mother said she would have voted with you. And I said, I know she would have, because they were some of the best people in the parish for social justice.
Oh, that's a
Parish
great.
in Fargo.
So that's the point, is that although, you know, these people work for companies, they have their talking points and they're defending the company's position. They're human beings, and you can impact their thinking through your speech and through your conviction.
Mhm.
And so don't be bashful. How do you do? My name is Sister Ruth Garretts, and I'll be moving the proposal on science-based targets, and I hope that you'll take this into your boardroom following this meeting, and that has an impact.
This is
And
Marge
Ruth,
again. I have
did we
another
hear
comment.
that passed?
What?
Did we hear that resolution pass?
Oh, no. Well, I mean, it had 38%.
Oh, 38%. Wonderful.
Which was
Great
that.
vote.
Mhm.
Sister Marge.
Yeah, just another comment about that. I would suggest being prepared to ask a question if you're at a shareholder meeting, because most often they will say, are there any questions? And they give you a split second to possibly jump up and say, yes, I have a question. But
Mhm.
you'd have to really be prepared in advance.
We
Yeah,
are
we
almost.
often, when I think, Chris, you went to the IBM stockholders meeting for us, but we also had other questions or comments that we wanted to put on the record. We wanted to actually thank them for their board diversity. And with other companies, we might arrange a question or a comment, actually, saying that they're concerned that the board is so undiverse, or that we're concerned that the company's been sued on a number of issues. Or we'd raise a question about a key employee relations or racial justice question. So I agree with you a lot.
We're at 89 minutes now into this. This time has just flown by. Maybe I'd offer to Pat and to Tim a final word, and then I'll just close it out if that's all right.
I'll start off, Pat, just to say again, thank you for being able to participate with you and reconnect with so many of you. I want to stress that I think we did a pretty good job in giving you some detailed responses to the SEC process, the shareholder resolution process. But I want to stress again that we can make the process fairly easy, as those of you who are veterans on the call know. The final point I'd make, Chris, is that Frank started off by saying this resolution process is under attack right now. There's conservative groups who've actually set themselves up to critique the resolution process. The Business Roundtable has led a vigorous campaign against it, as recently the National Association of Manufacturers. So I'm saying this not to get into it in depth, but to say at a certain point, we're going to need your help to write the SEC or write your members of Congress, urging them to take seriously the fact that this right of investors is under attack. And I know a number of members of Congress have told us that when they get letters from orders from some of the sisters, they've actually quoted from them on the floor of the Congress. And it mattered to them. So we'll work on that strategy with Frank and Chris when the moment is right, and we hope to have all persons on deck writing some letters and speaking out on this issue.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, well, thanks again to Frank and to Chris for hosting, and it's really an honor to be on with all of you. I just want to say thanks and just drive home the notion that the shareholder proposal process is one of the ways in which we, it's called impact investing, called ESG, SRI, social responsible investing. I think the folks on this call know what this is. It's making corporations accountable to human values, and you are in a unique position to do this through your moral witness and through the way you word a proposal, like we say, the way you stand up and deliver a speech at a shareholder meeting. If you just look at all of the amazing coverage, companies vary in size. So some companies get more attention than others, but Sister Nora Nash's remarks at the Wells Fargo annual meeting this past year were covered to Kingdom Come, and they should have been. And that's because, we can be very clear in this community about the imperative to hold corporations accountable to human values. And we'll keep doing it and using this process as long as we have it. And I'm really grateful for your time today.
Well, and for our part, I think amen is a very good word with which to follow that. Pat, Tim, grateful for all that you do in this area of socially responsible investing, and especially for your sharing your time with us and our members and guests today. And we will take this recording then and make it available through our website, and we'll also send out the slides to you all. Thank you for being with us today. It really has been a great and valuable time for all of us.